Hi, and welcome to the last day of our Advent calendar, the Gospel according to Luke, day 24. Chapter 24. Not the end. As soon as the Sabbath had passed, the women went straight to Jesus' tomb. They took the spices they got ready and left as early as possible on Sunday morning. When they arrived, the first thing they saw was an enormous stone that had been put in front of the place where Jesus' body lay. It wasn't there where it had been left. They knew for sure that the stone had been in front of the tomb, and now it wasn't. It had been rolled away to one side. Odd. They went inside, not knowing what to expect, and Jesus' body wasn't there. They checked everywhere, but the body was definitely gone. Freaky. Two men suddenly appeared from nowhere. They were shiny and sort of glowing. You might remember someone like this right near the beginning of my story. The women couldn't deal with a missing body and shiny, glowing, suddenly appearing men, and they just fell down onto the floor. They were absolutely terrified. Then the men spoke. "Why are you looking for someone who is alive in a place where you find the dead? Jesus isn't here. He's alive. He's been raised from the dead, just like he said he would. Think back. Remember when you were with him in Galilee? He said this would happen. He said he'd die on a cross and they'd come back to life 3 days later." The women sat up slowly and began to remember everything that Jesus had said. They couldn't keep it all in, and they ran as fast as they possibly could, almost tripping over their own feet, to find Jesus' disciples, to tell them that it had all come true. When they found them, they could hardly speak. They were so excited. They told them exactly what had happened. They told them Jesus was alive, but the disciples thought the women were talking a load of rubbish and didn't believe a word they said. But Peter wondered, why would the women be making it up? He left everyone and ran to the tomb to see for himself. When he looked inside, he could only see the cloth Jesus had been wrapped in. Definitely no body. He made his way back to everyone else, and he kept on wondering. Later on, two of the disciples were on their way to a place called Emmaus. They were walking slowly along the road, feeling sorry for themselves. They couldn't stop talking and thinking about everything that had happened, and they were wearing super sad faces. They didn't know what to believe anymore. The man they trusted, the man they'd followed, the man they'd listened to, he was gone. Jesus came close to the disciples and walked along next to them. For a while, they didn't even notice him. But when they did, they didn't recognize him at all. So he started to talk to them. "What are you two talking about?" They looked at Jesus with their sad faces and then looked at each other with a slightly confused look. "Are you the only person in the whole of Jerusalem who doesn't know what has just happened?" one of them said. "Maybe. What do you mean?" said Jesus. "Everything that happened to Jesus, the carpenter's son from Nazareth. He did amazing things and showed people that he was a messenger from God. Everyone loved him. Then the chief priests got him arrested for no reason, and then they had him crucified. We thought he was going to be the one who would set us free. We thought he was the Messiah. But that all ended 3 days ago. Some of the women who've been following us around reckon they went to Jesus' tomb and his body was gone. They said some shiny, glowing guys told them that Jesus was alive. Our friend Peter has been to the tomb to check, and he says it was empty too, but there was no Jesus anywhere to be found. Jesus smiled and said to the disciples, "Can't you see? Why don't you get it? Think about everything you've been told. Surely you knew that the Messiah had to suffer first before everything was made right." Jesus explained everything that God's messengers had said about him years and years and years before, and they listened to him as they walked. When they were getting close to Emmaus, they slowed down near the house where they were staying. Jesus seemed to have somewhere else to go and was about to leave when the disciples said, "Don't go, stay. Stay here with us. It's late. It'll be dark soon." Soon Jesus went inside with them and stayed for a while. They all sat down to have a meal together. Jesus picked up the bread from the table, thanked God for it, and then passed it around. The disciples froze and stared and kept on staring. Their eyes grew wider by the second. Then suddenly they knew exactly who this man was. But before they could say anything or do anything, Jesus had vanished. Of course it was him. Why didn't we realize sooner? The way he was speaking when we were walking, the way he told us what had been written about him. It's really him. Even though it was in the middle of the night, they knew they had to tell the others. They left straight away and went back to Jerusalem. It was all true. The others needed to know. When they arrived, they found the disciples and a few others all together in a room. They were hiding away and still talking about everything that had happened. By this point, Peter had also seen Jesus, so now everyone was convinced he was alive. The disciples who walked from Emmaus shared their story with smiles that wouldn't leave their faces, even a bit where they hadn't realized who Jesus was until he shared the bread. Duh. Everyone was talking and trying to figure out what was going on when Jesus appeared in the middle of the room and said, "Hi." "Ah," said the disciples all together. They couldn't believe their eyes. "How did you get in here?" Their knees were knocking together, and they were seriously scared. They thought this Jesus person must be a ghost. "Don't look frightened. Why don't you believe it? Look at me. Come close and see. Touch me. Poke me. I'm real. Ghosts don't have skin and bones like I do." Jesus held out his hands and his feet and moved around the room. The disciples stared. They were absolutely blown away. "I'm hungry," Jesus said. "Have you got any food?" "Fish," they managed to say, and passed Jesus a piece to eat. He munched his way through his hunk of fish while they all just stared at him. Then Jesus said, "When I was with you before, I told you everything that had already been said about me, everything that had to happen. Don't you remember the writings left behind by God's messengers so long ago? They said the Messiah would have to die, and 3 days later, he would be alive again. They said that people everywhere needed to go through me to get to God, so they can be forgiven. And that starts now. You need to tell everyone everything that has happened. You need to tell them it's all true. Start here. Start now in Jerusalem. But don't go any further until God sends you the help he's promised from heaven. The disciples followed Jesus out to Bethany, where he prayed and asked God for good things for them. As he was praying, God took him away to heaven. The disciples couldn't stop telling people how wonderful he was. They couldn't stop shouting out to Jesus with joy. They made their way back to Jerusalem with enormous, unstoppable grins on their faces, and they hung out in the temple, praising God nonstop. This wasn't the end at all. It was just the beginning. This concludes our journey through Luke's Gospel. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. If you've stayed on our Advent schedule, then tonight is Christmas Eve. I wish you all a merry and joyful Christmas, as well as a prosperous and healthy New Year. God bless you all.